The nanny ran into the fire to save the millionaire's son. And what happened next stunned him. The afternoon sunlight spread a golden glow over the vast fields of the Walker Ranch, where long, white fences stretched endlessly. Today, that peaceful scenery had transformed into a lavish celebration. In the grand hall, round tables covered in pristine white silk were adorned with red roses and crystal glasses that sparkled under the golden lights. Guests in immaculate suits and dazzling evening gowns raised their glasses to toast Ethan Walker and his fiancée, Samantha Reed. This was the day they officially presented themselves as an engaged couple, an event eagerly awaited by the wealthy community of Texas. Soft music from the live band floated through the air, mingling with cheerful laughter and chatter. Liam, a 5-year-old boy, the only son of Ethan, ran around between the tables, clutching a worn-out blue toy car. Everyone laughed as the little boy weaved through the gowns of elegant ladies, a small, bright spark amid the glamorous party. But only moments later, that joy vanished. A small explosion rang out from the direction of the main stable, followed by a thick column of black smoke rising to cover the sky. Instantly, the music stopped, and murmurs of confusion filled the air. Then came a scream that tore through the silence. "Daddy, help me!" It was Liam. His voice echoed from the stable, now engulfed in flames. The once magnificent scene instantly turned into a nightmare. Guests in luxurious attire scrambled to escape, stumbling on the uneven ground. Crystal glasses shattered with sharp crashes. Chairs and tables clattered to the floor. Elegant ladies who had just been composed now screamed in terror, their ball gowns tangling and dragging them down. The acrid smell of gasoline spread thick in the air, choking everyone with harsh coughs. The fire spread at an unnatural speed, latching onto dry wood and hay, rolling into blazing red tongues that devoured everything in their path. The crackle of breaking timber sounded like cries of agony, twisting hearts with dread. The heat was so fierce that even the local firefighters who had just arrived hesitated, unable to rush inside. Amid the chaos, the image of little Liam trapped inside the stable became a living horror. Guests screamed for Ethan, while others cast desperate looks at him. Ethan stood frozen, his face pale, his heart squeezed in a merciless grip. He was about to run forward, but Samantha's hands blocked him. "No, Ethan, it's too dangerous. Let the firefighters handle it." Her eyes, though shimmering with tears, carried a strange coldness, distant and unyielding. In that moment, Ethan faltered, powerless. And then, while everyone else wavered, a small figure stepped out from the crowd. Grace Miller, the new nanny who had only been working for less than a month, someone most people couldn't even remember by name. Dressed in her simple uniform, hair hastily tied back, she had always been invisible in this glamorous world. But at that moment, Grace did not flee. Instead, she walked straight toward the sea of fire. Some voices screamed at her to turn back, but Grace heard nothing. Amid the billowing smoke and frantic cries, only one truth echoed inside her heart. Liam was in there, and she could not let the boy burn alive before her eyes. No one had time to stop her. All they saw was Grace rushing toward the stable, where the flames roared like a bloodthirsty beast, devouring everything in its path. Thick black smoke billowed upward, the stench of burning plastic and scorched hay stabbing straight into everyone's lungs, forcing them to retreat. Yet Grace did not slow down. Every step she took felt like treading on blazing knives, but her eyes were steadier than ever. Before throwing herself into the fire, Grace grabbed a fallen tablecloth, quickly dipped it into a water bucket near the horse trough, and wrapped the wet cloth around her mouth and nose. She clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with determination. "Liam, can you hear me? Answer me!" Grace shouted, her voice hoarse from the smoke, but still echoing. The flames inside the stable roared like a wild beast. Wooden beams cracked sharply, and burning fragments from the roof fell, sparking right in front of her. The heat seared as though it would scorch her skin alive, making the sweat on her forehead evaporate instantly. But she did not stop. Guided by the instincts of someone who had faced hellfire more than once, Grace crouched low, moving along the thick smoke. Every breath felt like swallowing embers, burning her throat raw. Her eyes stung with tears streaming down, yet they searched relentlessly. Then, amid the crackling explosions, Grace heard a faint sound, the broken sobs of a child. "Miss, I'm scared." Liam's voice. Grace's heart clenched tight. She dropped to her knees, bracing on her elbows, crawling across the scorching ground, squeezing past collapsed beams. Finally, in a corner piled with half-burned hay, she saw him. Liam sat curled up, clutching his worn blue toy car, his face streaked with tears and soot. Grace lunged forward at once, wrapping her arms tightly around the boy. He trembled violently against her chest. "It's okay now, Liam. I'm here. I'll get you out," Grace whispered, her voice choked yet firm. She turned her body to shield him, making herself a barrier against the fiery sparks. Suddenly, a burning beam crashed down, blocking the way out. The deafening crack was followed by flames surging high in front of them. The wet cloth on Grace's face had dried completely, toxic smoke flooding her lungs and forcing her into harsh coughs. Her shirt caught fire, red streaks of flame racing across the fabric. With no other choice, Grace clutched Liam tightly and rolled across the ground. Ash burst up around them, her skin seared with pain, but the flames on her clothes gradually died. Breathing in sharp gasps, her eyes still burned with resolve. "You have to trust me. We're getting out right now," she told Liam firmly. Cradling the boy in her arms, Grace forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled, but she did not stop. She pushed toward the other end of the stable, where faint light seeped through a cracked door. Every step felt like fighting against a storm of fire. Burning roof fragments rained down, sparks exploding, smoke so thick it blinded her path. Grace's heart pounded as if it would burst, but amid the roar of the fire, Liam's weak, wheezing breaths in her arms were the sound she clung to. And then, with one final desperate surge, Grace burst through the charred doorway. Cool air outside rushed in, so sharp it was overwhelming. Grace collapsed to her knees on the grass, still clutching Liam tightly. The crowd held its breath. Ethan screamed and rushed forward, scooping his son into his arms, tears streaming down his face. The boy coughed violently, but he was alive. As for Grace, her entire body was cloaked in smoke, her eyes bloodshot, her arms scorched with burns, yet she still held on to the child until the very last second. In that moment, every gaze fell upon her, the woman no one had noticed before, now rising as a hero in the heart of the inferno. That night, the wail of an ambulance siren pierced the Texas darkness, racing through the night at full speed. Inside the brightly lit cabin, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic mixed with smoke still clinging to their clothes. Liam lay motionless on the small stretcher, his face flushed from smoke, a full oxygen mask covering his young features. The heart monitor beeped steadily, but to Ethan, each sound felt like a blade slicing into his chest. He sat close by, gripping his son's tiny hand tightly, afraid that if he let go, the boy would slip away. Across from him, Grace leaned back against the wall of the vehicle. Her arm was badly burned, blistered skin visible beneath the torn fabric of her shirt, the heat still etched into her flesh. A medic hurried over, carefully wrapping sterile gauze around her arm and injecting painkillers into her vein. Grace bit her lip, clutching the edge of the seat, eyes squeezed shut to endure the agony. Yet she did not utter a single complaint, not even a groan. Ethan glanced over. His eyes left his son's hand and stopped on Grace's face, the woman who had just walked through an inferno to bring Liam back. His throat tightened. "Grace!" His voice was hoarse, trembling. I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, my son." He couldn't finish because even imagining that dreadful outcome made his heart seize. Grace opened her eyes and shook her head slightly. Sweat and smoke had reddened them, but her voice remained calm. "You don't need to thank me. I only did what had to be done." Ethan wanted to say more, but Liam whimpered softly, coughing hard beneath the oxygen mask. Immediately, he turned back, his hands shaking as he patted his son's back. The fear gripped the father's heart all over again. In another corner, Samantha sat silently, her ball gown still immaculate, her glossy hair untouched. She dabbed the corner of her eyes with a handkerchief, letting out sobs so loud they drowned out the machines in the vehicle. And yet, strangely, her cheeks remained dry, without a single tear. When the ambulance reached the hospital, doctors rushed Liam straight into the emergency room. Ethan followed closely, his face pale, but his gaze resolute. Samantha walked behind, lips curved as if exhausted, but in her eyes glimmered a cold, inexplicable light. Grace was helped out of the vehicle, her arm hastily bandaged, and brought to a corner of the hallway to await further examination. She sat on a plastic chair, head bowed low, her hand gripping the white bandage already stained with antiseptic. Moments later, a doctor emerged to announce that Liam's condition had stabilized. He still needed close monitoring, but the worst had passed. Relief surged through Ethan, his shoulders sagging under the weight of exhaustion. He turned to share the moment with Samantha, but in that instant, a memory flashed. The firefighters had mentioned security footage, someone seen walking into the stables just before the blaze erupted. A tall, slender figure carrying a metallic bag. The stride, the delicate shoulders, the hurried steps. The resemblance to Samantha was chilling. Ethan swallowed hard, his palms damp with sweat. The thought was monstrous, but it was also too sharp, too vivid to ignore. He lifted his eyes. While Grace sat silently, her eyes still rimmed with red, Samantha paced the hallway slowly, as though forcing composure. She feigned concern with the doctors, then returned with exaggerated sobs. But her eyes remained cold, empty. Grace spoke softly, her voice weary but resolute. "That fire didn't spread like an accident. I've seen too many to know better. Someone started it deliberately." Ethan turned to her. There was no panic in Grace's eyes, only the certainty of someone who had stared into flames countless times before. Her words tightened a knot deep in his chest. He glanced at Samantha, but she immediately snapped back, "Ridiculous. She's just spinning tales to make herself look like a hero." Her voice rose high, shrill, trying to drown out the tension. Ethan said nothing, but in his mind, a seed had been planted, and he knew it was only the beginning. Night fell over Texas, the sky blanketed with heavy clouds, the moon hiding behind thin wisps of lingering smoke. The hospital glowed like a lonely oasis in the barren land. Inside a small room, Ethan sat by the window, eyes vacant as he stared into the darkness outside. Beyond the wall, Liam slept under sedation, occasionally whimpering, murmuring broken words. "It's so hot, Mommy. Help me." Those words cut into Ethan like knives, his fists clenched, his whole body trembling. His son had just walked through a living hell, and someone had deliberately created that hell. The room was silent, filled only with the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Samantha sat opposite him on a couch, a teacup resting in her hand. Every movement of hers was gentle, almost serene, as though this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience that would soon pass. Ethan looked at his fiancée, and his heart tightened. Could the figure on the camera really be Samantha? The thought made him shudder, yet the image was too clear to deny. He rose to his feet, walked out, leaving Samantha alone with her flawless, almost artificial composure. The hospital yard was deserted, filled only with the rasping calls of cicadas and insects hidden in the shadows. Ethan walked toward a row of stone benches beneath the trees, where the street light cast a long strip of light. He sat down, inhaling deeply, trying to shake off the suffocating weight in his chest. But the more he breathed, the heavier it grew. A faint sound came from behind. Ethan turned. It was Grace. She wore a pale hospital coat, her bandaged arm held carefully as she walked slowly, clearly still in pain. The yellow light scattered across her weary face, her eyes red from smoke and tears. She sat at the far end of the bench, keeping just enough distance, as though afraid to come closer. For a moment, both sat in silence. Ethan lowered his head and murmured, "Thank you for saving Liam. I owe you everything." Grace gave a faint smile and shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I just couldn't let another child die before my eyes." Ethan turned to her. That look in his eyes made Grace tremble slightly, but she drew in a deep breath, gathering her courage. "You don't remember me, do you?" The question startled him. "What do you mean?" Grace's gaze drifted toward the dark sky, her voice low and trembling. "Years ago? We met once? Not for long, just a fleeting moment. But for me, it was a memory I could never forget." Ethan's heart jolted. A vague memory surfaced. An evening long ago, a strange pair of eyes, a fleeting smile. He was about to ask more, but Grace quickly shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Maybe this isn't the time, but someday, Ethan, you'll understand why I can't forget." The silence deepened. Ethan noticed her hands clutching a silver locket, the dim light glinting off the photo inside, though he couldn't see it clearly. It was Alan's picture, the boy with dimples, a wound that would never heal. Grace closed her eyes, and the memories crashed back, the roof collapsing, the roaring red flames, the heart-wrenching screams of her comrades. And then the final image, her empty arms holding the lifeless body of her son. Silent tears streamed down, falling onto the cold stone floor. A strange feeling stirred in Ethan's chest, as if an invisible thread was binding them, though he couldn't name it. Grace rose to her feet, ready to return inside. Before leaving, she turned back, her eyes flickering with light, her voice thick with emotion. "There's only one thing I know for sure. Liam is alive because I didn't give up. Because I know what it means to lose a child." Her words lingered like a blade carved into Ethan's heart. He remained on the bench, his trembling hand brushing the cold stone, Grace's voice echoing in his mind. In the darkness, his doubts about Samantha grew heavier, but alongside them, another question began to take shape. Who truly was Grace, and what invisible bond had always tied them together without his knowing? Dawn broke over Texas, the sky painted in pale gold after a long night, filled with smoke and ashes. In the hospital room, Liam opened his eyes, his cheeks still flushed with a mild fever, but his breathing steadier. After examining him, the doctor smiled and announced, "The boy is out of danger. He can be discharged today, but he needs complete rest and continued monitoring at home." Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. He embraced his son, feeling the fragile warmth he had almost lost forever. Liam nestled his head against his father's chest, whispering weakly, "Daddy, I want to go home." But home, the Walker Ranch, was now nothing but a pile of ashes. Ethan held his son tighter and whispered, "We'll go to the mansion, where everything is still safe for you." That morning, a car carried all four of them, Ethan, Samantha, Grace, and Liam, back to the family's suburban mansion. The grand house, with its proud red roof rising above lush gardens, seemed imposing. Yet when they stepped inside, the air felt heavy, as if cloaked in an invisible smoke. Breakfast was laid out in the vast dining room, a polished oak table spread with toast, fresh fruit, and a steaming pot of tea. But no one touched the food. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his eyes burdened. Liam was placed in a small chair beside him, still weary, his face shadowed with lingering fear. Samantha sat opposite, her posture flawless, lips pressed tight as though bracing for battle. Grace came down the stairs, her arm carefully bandaged. Ethan set down his coffee cup, his voice firm and clear. "Grace, sit with us. After everything, you're not just a nanny. You saved my son's life." Grace froze, her eyes widening. In her position, she had never imagined having a seat at this table. But Ethan had spoken, and Liam's small hand tugged at hers. Reluctantly, she sat beside them, though she could feel Samantha's cold stare piercing her. No one touched their food. The air thickened, waiting for a storm to break. Ethan placed his cup down again, his voice booming, cutting through the silence. "Samantha, I reviewed the footage from the garage camera. A woman entered right before the fire erupted. The stride, the figure, it looked very much like you." Samantha's hand tightened around her silver spoon. A flicker of unease passed through her eyes, but her face quickly returned to calm. "Do you really think that was me?" she scoffed, her voice sharp. "I left the hall only to take a phone call. The garage was the quietest place. If the camera captured me there, what's so strange about that?" Her tone was firm, but the defensiveness only deepened Ethan's suspicions. Grace, who had remained silent, finally looked up. Her eyes, still red from smoke and sleeplessness, carried a steady resolve. "I've faced dozens of fires. The blaze last night spread far too quickly, igniting the most critical points first. That wasn't random. Someone set it up." Samantha snapped her gaze toward Grace, her lips tightening into a sharp line. "And what about you? You were there? You ran straight into the fire? Who's to say you didn't start it yourself, only to play the hero afterward and win Ethan's trust?" The accusation struck like a knife. Liam clung to his father's hand, whispering, "It wasn't Miss Grace." But his weak voice was drowned in the tension of the room. Ethan sat frozen. On one side, his proud fiancée, on the other, the woman who had saved his son's life. Inside him, his heart felt torn in two. His eyes drifted unconsciously toward the silver locket Grace always held so tightly. Some truth lay right before him, still hidden beneath the ashes of the past. That afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the windows of the mansion, Ethan sat alone in his study. The spacious room, with its oak bookshelves and the family portrait hanging on the wall, felt unbearably heavy, as though all of it was pressing down on his shoulders. 3 knocks came at the door. The butler entered, carrying a thick envelope, carefully sealed. "Mr. Walker, this is the file from the detective's office. They said it must be delivered directly into your hands." Ethan took it, the envelope feeling 10 times heavier than its real weight. When the door closed, he tore open the seal and pulled out the file. The pages were thick, neatly typed, with some faintly printed photographs attached. He flipped quickly through the first few pages. Hair salon bills, shopping receipts, weekend trips, things far too ordinary, too familiar. But the more he read, the tighter his brow furrowed. Page 10. A bank transaction record. Transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands, each time tens of thousands of dollars. No reason, no notes. The next page. A receipt for the purchase of industrial solvents and flammable chemicals registered under the name of a shell company. Date of purchase, just 2 days before the fire. Ethan's heart pounded, sweat breaking out on his temples. He flipped faster, his hands trembling. A sheet slipped out of the file. Ethan bent down to pick it up, his eyes locking on the bold print. Life insurance policy. Insured, Ethan Walker. Sole beneficiary, Samantha Reed. Ethan collapsed back into his chair, his face pale. The room seemed to spin around him. The suspicions he had tried to suppress since the night before were now laid bare in black and white. No longer an illusion, no longer a coincidence. He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath, but his hands continued to shake uncontrollably. In his mind, the images of the fire returned. Liam screaming in the flames, Grace throwing herself into the inferno to save his son, and Samantha standing outside with her cold, detached eyes. It all came together like a collage of blood and ashes. Ethan snapped the file shut, but part of it was obscured by blacked-out sections, entire passages of the report heavily redacted. The detective had left a note. "Some information is too sensitive. I will only disclose it in person." Ethan gripped the file tightly, fury blazing in his eyes. He knew now that the truth was undeniable. Samantha was not only someone he could not trust, but a direct danger to his family. But beneath those blacked-out lines, what else was hidden? Night fell over the Walker mansion. The chandelier lights poured down into the vast living room, reflecting off the polished wooden floor. Ethan stood before the long table. On it lay the thick file, the proof of betrayal. The door opened. Samantha stepped in, wrapped in a scarlet silk dress like a flame, a glass of wine gleaming in her hand. Her smile was casual, but her eyes flickered with suspicion at the sight of the file in front of Ethan. "You called me?" Samantha asked, her voice drawn out, tinged with mockery. Ethan did not answer immediately. He hurled the file onto the table, pages scattering like deadly pieces of evidence. "Explain this. All these transactions, receipts for chemicals, the life insurance policy. What do you have to say?" For a moment, Samantha's face went pale, but within seconds, she lifted her chin and smiled arrogantly. "You think you know everything? You never really loved me, Ethan. You only wanted a perfect image to parade around. I'm only taking back what should have been mine." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice a growl. "By burning down my house? By throwing Liam's life into the fire?" Samantha set her wineglass down, her eyes flashing with madness. The boy was just a small sacrifice. Everything would have been perfect if that nanny hadn't ruined it. At that moment, Grace appeared in the doorway. She had been about to leave, but those words froze her blood. Her eyes darkened, and her voice rang out, firm and unwavering. A small sacrifice? That was a child. Samantha turned, her gaze blazing. "Ah, and here's our heroine, a piece of worthless trash daring to interfere with me." Grace did not back down. "I don't need a title. I only need Liam alive. And he deserves to know the truth about the woman he was going to marry." The air tightened like a drawn bowstring. Samantha pulled a small glass vial from her purse, filled with a clear liquid, the stench of alcohol thick in the air. She raised it high, her hand trembling, but her eyes wild. "One more step, and I'll burn this entire mansion down. Let's see who dares to defy me then." Ethan started, instinctively stepping in front of Grace. But Grace did not tremble. In her eyes, eyes that had stared into flames countless times, steel glinted. In an instant, she lunged forward, striking the vial from Samantha's hand. It shattered, the smell of alcohol spreading through the room, but no fire caught. Grace spun, using unexpected strength to pin Samantha down, forcing her onto the couch. "Enough!" Grace's voice rang out, commanding like an order. Samantha writhed and screamed, "You don't understand anything. This is a plot against me. I'm the real victim." The pounding of shoes echoed. The butler and 2 security guards rushed in, followed by the police Ethan had called earlier. In moments, Samantha was handcuffed, screaming in desperation, but her words now were nothing more than hollow echoes in the vast room. Ethan stood there, breathless, his eyes brimming with tears. He turned to Grace. She collapsed into a chair, her breathing ragged, her hair disheveled, blood seeping through her bandaged arm again. Though her body trembled, her eyes held something unshakable, something Ethan had never seen in anyone else. In that moment, he understood. Without Grace, he would have lost everything. The mansion sank into silence after the police took Samantha away. The sound of sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a heavy emptiness like ashes after a fire. Ethan stood at the living room window, eyes fixed on the blue and red lights vanishing into the night. Inside, everything was finally quiet, yet his heart could not find peace. Across from him, Grace sat on a chair, both hands clutching the silver locket, her shoulders trembling slightly. She did not look at Ethan. The dim light cast across her face, revealing streaks of tears that had not yet dried. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softened after the storm of anger. "Grace, there's no danger anymore. Samantha will pay for what she's done. You saved Liam, you saved me. I owe you everything." Grace shook her head lightly. Her eyes carried the weight of a secret she could no longer bear. She opened the locket and placed it in Ethan's palm. Inside was an old, faded photograph. A boy beaming with a radiant smile, deep dimples etched on his cheeks. "This is Alan," she said, her voice breaking. "My son." Ethan stared at the photo. There was something eerily familiar in that smile, in those clear eyes. Grace swallowed hard, tears rising, and whispered as if pouring out her very soul. "Alan wasn't just my son, he was yours too, Ethan." The room seemed to collapse in that instant. Ethan froze, his eyes wide, his heart pounding violently in his chest. "What? No, it can't be," he stammered, his voice faltering. Grace nodded, tears falling onto her trembling hands. "Years ago, when I was young, we met. Just one fleeting night, and then you left. But I carried a life inside me. I never told you because you had moved on, and I chose silence. But the price was losing Alan in the fire, and I've never forgiven myself." Ethan raised a hand to his face, feeling as though the ground beneath him was shaking. Old blurred memories surged back, fragments long forgotten, now piecing together into a painful truth. He sank down in front of Grace, his trembling hand clutching hers. "My God, Grace, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Grace lifted her gaze, her eyes red with tears, holding both release and unbearable sorrow. "Because I knew you deserved a perfect family, not the burden of my past. I only wanted to be near Liam, because in him I saw a part of Alan." Ethan was speechless. He gripped her hand tighter, tears spilling freely. In the silence, the two sat facing each other, bound by grief and a love they had long buried. The fire had consumed the ranch, but it had also burned away the masks, revealing the raw truth. They had once belonged to each other, and the loss they shared could never be erased. Next morning, the Texas sky was unusually clear after many days of gloom. The early sunlight streamed through the mansion's large windows, casting a gentle glow over the house. But inside Ethan's heart, Grace's confession from the night before still burned like an unquenched fire. He found her on the porch, still clutching the silver locket in her hand. Ethan walked over and sat beside her. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice choked with emotion. "Grace, I want to see my son. Take me to where Alan rests." Grace looked up, her eyes filled with surprise and trembling. She had thought Ethan would avoid the truth or drown in resentment, but his gaze now was steady, though still pained. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "I've missed him his whole life. I can't miss him one more time." The car left the mansion, driving down tree-lined suburban roads. No one spoke along the way, only the steady sound of wheels rolling. Grace held the locket tightly in her hand, her heart aching yet relieved. At last, the truth was no longer buried. When the car stopped, they stepped into a small cemetery, quiet under the shade of old trees. Rows of gravestones stood neatly, the wind rustling through the leaves. Grace led Ethan to a corner where a small, simple headstone appeared, engraved with the words, "Alan Walker, a light that never fades." Ethan froze, his hand unconsciously clenching. his own name etched in stone, but belonging to a child he had never held. His eyes blurred, his throat tightening. Grace laid a bouquet of white flowers at the foot of the stone. She lit an incense stick and handed it to Ethan. His large hands trembled as he took it, lit the flame, and watched the thin smoke drift skyward. "Alan," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "Son, I'm sorry. I wasn't there when you needed me. I didn't know. But I'm here now, and I'll never abandon you again." He bowed his head, tears falling, soaking into the earth. Grace stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her eyes blurred with tears as well. Liam, still clutching his charred toy car, stepped forward and placed it beside the grave. His childish voice rang out, innocent yet sincere. "Brother Alan, I'm Liam. I promise I'll play for the both of us." That moment shattered Grace and Ethan's hearts, yet healed them in part. They embraced Liam, the three of them kneeling before the grave like a complete family, though marked by a loss that could never be undone. As evening fell, they returned to the mansion. Ethan and Grace sat together on the porch, watching Liam sleep peacefully on the long chair. The sky blazed orange, and the wind carried the fresh scent of flowers and grass. Ethan turned, taking Grace's hand firmly. "The fire took so much, but it also brought you back to me. This time, I won't let silence destroy us again." Grace looked at him, her eyes shimmering, but her lips curved into a smile. "And I won't leave again." In that moment, they understood. From the ashes, a new beginning was forming, a family reborn through truth, sacrifice, and a love that nothing could ever burn away. 2 years later, the Walker Ranch had been reborn. No smoke, no charred beams, only a home filled with light and laughter. And today the garden basked in sunshine, hosting the wedding many had long awaited. White chairs lined the aisle, petals scattered along the path. At its head, Liam appeared in a tiny suit, beaming as he carried the rings on a velvet pillow. Guests laughed and clapped, and the boy puffed his chest with pride. Grace walked forward in a simple white gown, her eyes fixed on Ethan, waiting in his gray suit, his smile trembling with emotion. But her heart caught when Liam dashed over, grabbed her hand, then reached for Ethan's, pressing their 3 hands together. "Now we're a family, right?" he asked, eyes shining. Ethan squeezed both their hands, his voice thick. "Yes, from now and forever." When the minister declared them husband and wife, applause rippled through the garden. Ethan kissed Grace's forehead, then bent to lift Liam into his arms, holding them both tight as if making a vow to the world. In the front row of the ceremony, an empty chair was placed solemnly, with a small plaque on its back. "For Alan, always a part of this family." A bouquet of white flowers rested neatly, their petals trembling gently in the breeze, as if carrying the echo of a child's laughter. Grace looked at Ethan, then softly met Liam's eyes. In that moment, for the first time in years, her heart felt truly at peace. Her family, though marked by loss, was finally complete.